Well, I want to welcome everybody to the Home Retrofit Webinar Series brought to you by SmartNet Alliance and the City of Ottawa. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Nick Hebb with SmartNet Alliance. And the Alliance is a group of businesses and organizations who collaborate on projects and initiatives to accelerate the transition to Canada's sustainable economy. So for more information on our Alliance, be sure to check out our website, which I'll share into chat shortly here. Also check out our membership pages. That's a great place to start if you are looking for any retrofits. We've got members working in the energy audit space, solar providers, home builders, retrofit contractors, everything you can look at around sustainability. So do check out our membership pages. You can surf onto each member, check out a video for them, some PDF resources, testimonials, pictures of projects. We've recently upgraded our website to allow for that. So it's a great place to start if you're looking around for different organizations and companies to help in your retrofits. So tonight we present the third episode of the Home Retrofit Webinar Series. And the first two episodes, as I mentioned, are available on YouTube. And I'll add that link shortly for folks who are just jumping on. And tonight we're going to examine a few different considerations that we've sort of heard about in the first two episodes that people were wondering about. And those include airtightness, insulation, windows and doors, and electrical panel upgrades. So we've got a lot to cover. Joining us is Gary Sharp from Airtight Home Technologies. We've got Steventhwaites from Dahlman Windows and Doors, Joshua Reinhardt from PG Electrical Solutions, and we also have Registered Energy Advisor Scott Mayer from Enviro Center, who's going to wrap things up. And we'll also hear from Aaron Thornhill, who's over at the City of Ottawa, and he'll give us an update on the Better Home Loan Program. So a reminder, if you do have questions, add them into chat there, and we'll sort of quarterback them over after the presentations to each speaker. And then we've got a couple of REAs in the chat that will help that. So let's kick things off and bring in our first speaker. We've got Gary Sharp, and he's the president of Airtight Home Technologies, an AeroBarrier dealer. So we're going to hear all about what AeroBarrier is. It's an innovative new product. And Gary has been involved in the construction and renovation industry for over 30 years, working towards improving energy efficiency of Canadian housing. He's also a member of the Canadian Home Builders Association. And while at CHBA, Gary was staff lead on their technical research committee, the Renovator Council, and the Home Modification Council. So he had a lot going on. He also served as a representative on the National Building Code Advisory body, committees, and working groups. So welcome in Gary Sharp from Airtight Home Technologies. Gary, thanks for joining us and presenting on insulation and airtightness.
Thanks very much, Nick. I'll just take a second here and share my screen. There. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, it usually just takes a couple of minutes to come up. I don't have it yet on screen. Yep, it's coming now. So we're good. We see AeroBarrier. Take it away, Gary. Thanks again for joining us.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Thanks very much to everyone for joining in on the call tonight. And I'd also like to thank the SmartNet Alliance for allowing me to speak. So AeroBarrier is a technology for enhancing the air barrier in a house. AeroBarrier is not the air barrier per se, but it makes the materials that make up the air barrier, it makes the air barrier better. So tonight we're going to talk about renovations. My company is called Airtight Home Technology. We're the AeroBarrier dealer for Eastern Ontario. And for some reason, it doesn't want to move. Let me just turn it off here. And we'll
it's frozen. It's the weather out there, Gary. It's frozen all of our computers.
It's got to be.
Beautiful desktop picture, though. We can reflect for a minute.
Let's try again. How's that?
Yeah. Do you want to just? Yeah. There you go. Thanks, Gary.
So I'm going to start off with a little bit of building science and maybe a little bit of history, just so everybody's on the same page. Some of you may remember that in the 1970s, the world was running out of energy and we had an energy crisis. And at that time, we started to work on how to make houses more energy efficient to save money. And prior to that time, The house was considered to be a group of components, windows and doors and furnaces and, the walls. And no one ever considered the house as a system. That happened in the mid to late 1970s, and it was uniquely Canadian. It was the Canadian building industry that started to first look at the house and say, wait a second, all of these different components are connected. If we make the house more energy efficient, we can use smaller furnaces. And that's the idea behind the house as a system. So when we look at a house and we look at the system, it's really made up of 4 parts. So the outside environment, which of course is the weather. So depending on where you live, whether you're in the Arctic Circle or whether you're in Vancouver, your house is going to perform differently. The building envelope. The envelope is all of the components of the house that separate the inside from the outside. So the walls, the windows, the doors, the amount of insulation, the basement floor, all of that, that's all the part of the building envelope. The house mechanical system, so this would be your ventilation system, your heating system, your cooling system, all of those components are part of it. And we can't forget the occupants, because the occupants determine how the house is going to perform. I can't control, and no builder can control, whether the windows are left open or the doors are left open, or how hot you want to have your house, how warm you want your house inside, or how cool you want it. So the house occupants have a big part to play. Now, in terms of how your building is going to perform, there's the 3 big items that we need to manage in the building, which is heat, and that is done by insulation. So adding more insulation to the building to control the amount of heat loss. What I'm going to talk about tonight is air, controlling the airflow. And there's really 2 things there. There's the air barrier, and then there's also ventilation air. So as you make the house tighter, you need to provide ventilation air for the people that are going to live there. And a house cannot be too tight. A house can only be underventilated. So you need to have the house tight in order to be able to control the energy efficiency of that house. But you also need to provide ventilation air for the people that are living there. And the other one is moisture control. And typically that's done with vapor barrier, but also the air barrier plays a key role in the moisture control of the house. So air that's moving through the walls or through the ceiling and out of the house carries with it a lot of vapor. So let's look at what's happening here. So if we look at the, when the wind blows, of course, it has an effect on the house. So if you have a window open in your house and the wind's blowing, you're going to feel the air blow through that window. Well, your house also has a number of cracks and holes, which I'll call unintentional cracks and holes. And so when the wind blows, the air leaks either in or out of those unintentional holes. So when the wind blows, it puts a positive pressure on the windward side, puts a negative pressure or suction pressure on the leeward side, and the air that's moving over the roof causes the roof to act a little bit like an airplane wing, and it creates a suction pressure which tries to pull air out of the house as well. We've also got the stack effect. So this is the phenomenon that when air gets warm, warm air rises. And so whether the air is heated up because of the sun that's coming through your windows, or whether it's heated up because of your fireplace or your furnace, when the air is warm, it rises. And that causes the upper floors to be slightly pressurized compared to the lower floors. It's not very much pressure difference, but it is enough to cause air to move through those unintentional cracks and holes. And the other thing is your appliances and your ventilation equipment. So clothes dryers, bathroom fans, kitchen range hoods, all of those things exhaust air from the house. That causes your house to be depressurized, and the air from outdoors wants to leak in through those unintentional cracks and holes. The furnace does the same thing. So especially the older furnaces that used a chimney Modern furnaces use direct vent. So they take the air from outside to provide combustion air, and then they exhaust the products of combustion out through the sidewall as well. But the older furnaces, they used a chimney, and when they were operational, the warm air was going up the chimney, taking out the products of combustion, but it was also taking with it house air. And your fireplace is the same. If you've got an open fireplace in your house, whenever it is on, it's pulling as much air, if not more air, than your clothes dryer does. And even when the fireplace is off, that tendency for warm air to rise, the air will leak out through the chimney of your fireplace. So in terms of your building envelope, there's all kinds of leaks. One of the big ones is the joint between the floor joist and the basement on the first floor. It's also where the wall sits on the floor, cracks around the windows, ceiling light fixtures, plumbing stacks and wiring where they go through the ceiling or through the walls. All of those cracks and holes need to be sealed up. And the same in the basement, around where the floor slab meets the basement wall, or where stacks come up through the like your plumbing drains and that through the basement floor. These are all places where air can leak into the building. So what we want to do with an air barrier is we want the air barrier to be continuous all the way around the building. So the air barrier needs to connect to the windows, it needs to connect to the doors, it needs to connect to the concrete walls. And we're doing this to try and minimize the amount of unintentional air leakage through the house. And we do that by sealing all of the different components together. And we want it to be continuous. You should be able to see the red line there that goes all the way around the building. So a perfect air barrier would mean that the air changes on that house were 0. So that's the goal. Let's get to 0 and provide proper ventilation air to make the house nice and comfortable all the time. The air barrier also has to be durable because it has to last for the life of the building. You don't want your air barrier to fail after 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, we're building houses that are going to last 100 years, hopefully, and with one major renovation somewhere in the middle there. So we want the air barriers to last. And they're going to reduce the heating and cooling costs, and they're also going to control the amount of condensation that happens, because as the air leaks from inside the building, so if you've got air inside the building at 22 degrees C and it's humid because we put humidifiers in there to provide moisture in the air in the wintertime, as that air leaks from 22 degrees inside to minus 22 degrees or minus 30 degrees outside, at some point as that air is moving through the wall, it's going to cool down. And when it cools down to the dew point, the moisture that's in that air will condense out and it will leave moisture in your wall. Moisture in the wall is a bad thing because it can cause rot, or it can cause mold to grow inside of your wall system. So there's lots of materials that the builder uses to create the air barrier. He can use peel and stick membranes. Gypsum board is an air barrier. Plywood is an air barrier. Particle board. The rigid foam on the that they use often on the outside or underneath the basement floor or in the basement walls, they can be air barriers. Aluminum foil, if it's foil-backed insulation, it can be the air barrier, as well as polyethylene sheet. So polyethylene tends to be a very common air barrier because it acts not only as the air barrier, but also as a vapor retarder as well. And of course, house wraps like Tyvek and the like. So the builder uses all of these different materials, and the goal is to try and connect all of those along with the windows and doors to make sure that the house is as tight as possible. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the joints are missed, or the air barrier has been cut and no one fixed it, whatever. And so the air barrier is not continuous as we would like it to be. So here's a study that was done on a house in Ottawa, relatively small house, only 120 square meters. The blue lines represent the air tightness, and the orange bars there, they represent the surface loss. So since the insulation was not changing, the heat loss through the building remains pretty much the same, that is being caused by conduction and radiation. But you notice that the energy requirements change significantly based on the air tightness. So 15 air changes per hour. And I see that most of you are, or at least a lot of you are, quite literate in the air changes per hour because you've had energy audits and things done. But 15 air changes, or 12 to 15 air changes, that's a leaky old farmhouse, or as Lisa pointed out, it could be a house in England. So the 6 to 9, these were houses probably 1980s range. A lot of the houses that we're testing these days that are built to the building code, they're at 6. Some of them are a little better than that. Some are a little worse than that. 3 air changes per hour, that's where the builder has been paying attention to the detail around creating the air barrier and doing a really good job on the air barrier. That's what the building code assumes the houses are these days. And 1.5 is the requirement that was set for R2000 back in the early 1980s. So you can imagine that when houses in the 1980s were being built somewhere between 6 and 9 air changes, 1.5 was pretty aggressive. That is still the requirement for R2000 today. And for those of you who've heard about net zero houses, net zero house is one that produces as much energy as it consumes over the course of the year. And the target for those houses is 1.5 air changes or less. There's been over 800 houses that have been labeled to the net zero requirements. And the way the builders have done it is high performance windows, lots of insulation like R40 in the walls and R70 in the ceilings, and air tightness of less than 1. So they're really trying to get down there. The passive house, for those of you who heard about passive house has an air tightness of 0.6 or less. So it's very aggressive on passive house. So why do you want to do this? Well, you want to drop your heating load. You're going to decrease your cooling load. You're going to protect your building. So it leads to durability improvements of your house because you're protecting the building from moisture getting inside of the wall cavity from the inside of the building. It's also going to help with wind-driven rain getting into the building if your house is tighter. It's going to make the house quieter. It's going to stop dust and other pollutants from getting into the house through the unintentional cracks and holes. And it's going to eliminate drafts. So your house is going to generally perform better and be more comfortable. How do we do a blower door test? Well, it sounds like a lot of you have already had audits done, but basically you use a blower door, you exhaust air from the house, so you depressurize the house, you allow the air to leak in through the unintentional cracks and holes, and you measure how much air is leaking in. From that, we can calculate what the equivalent hole size is in your building as well. So how does AeroBarrier work? So what AeroBarrier does, like I said, it's not the air barrier. What it does is it enhances the air barrier and makes the air barrier that was installed by the builder or the renovator, it makes it better. So we start off by preparing the house. So we want to protect some of the surfaces in the house, any of the finishes. So we do that. Then we do an initial blower door test so we can see where we're starting. Now with AeroBarrier, we're doing it a little different. We're doing a positive pressure test rather than a negative pressure test. And the reason why we do that is because AeroBarrier works by sealing the unintentional holes with a special sealant that we spray into the air. So we want the sealant to try and leak out of the house through the unintentional cracks and holes. So we do positive testing. Then we run the seal and we continuously monitor the seal. So we're basically doing an air tightness test every minute and plotting that on a graph. So we can see the house improving in performance as we do the seal. We also go into the house periodically to check on how the seal's going, and also to look for holes that might be too big for the AeroBarrier material to seal them up. We can seal holes up to 5/8 of an inch. So whether they're holes or whether they're cracks, as long as they're less than 5/8 of an inch, we will seal those up. Once we've achieved the desired result, we shut the system down. Then we do a final blower door test so we can see how well we've done. And then we clean up all our prep materials and we blow the AeroBarrier that is left in the air. We blow that out of the house, and the house is ready for people to go back in within about 15 minutes of us finishing up. So when I say we want to prep it, this is on the left-hand side, you can see a window in a house that's under construction. So we basically cover the window sills, and we cover the window hardware, and that's the prep. We cover furnaces and heat recovery ventilators, any of the finished materials that are in the house, bathtubs and the like, we cover all that up. That's how we prep it. In a house that is being renovated, there's a lot of materials that are in there that are not going to be coming out. So cabinets, furniture, floors, all of those things need to be covered, and they need to be protected from the AeroBarrier material. So you can see that with renovations, it's a bit more difficult, or at least a bit more time consuming, to get the house ready to be sealed. Now here's the actual AeroBarrier process. So we have a liquid material. We spray it through a nozzle into the house, and we have a high pressure air that is connected to that, and that atomizes the material. So if you think of this material like sticky dust, so we blow this into the air and we create a fog. The blower door is pressurizing the house. So the air is trying to leak out of the house through the unintentional cracks and holes, and it carries with it these sticky dust particles. The sticky dust particle catches on the side of the hole, and then another particle sticks to it, and another particle sticks to it, excuse me, until the hole has been filled. And so sometimes when there's a fog in the house, these particles will bump into each other in the air, and they will stick together. And when you get enough particles that stick together, they will fall out of the air and drop pretty much straight down. So when we do our prep work, we have to protect everything that's horizontal that we don't want to get some of this material on. So floors, countertops, furniture, of course. So that's why we have to do the prep work on this. And then we continuously monitor it. Now, in terms of air barriers, this is unique in the industry, in that not until now, not until AeroBarrier has come along, have we ever been able to monitor the performance of the air barrier as it is being installed. So typically what happens is the, excuse me, the builder or the renovator will install the air barrier, and then sometime before people move in, an energy advisor will come by and do the blower door test. Excuse me. And they will say that they'll determine what the number is at that point in time. For us, we're able to continuously monitor as the air barrier is being tightened. So that's pretty significant in the building industry these days. Now here's one. In this case, the picture on the left was a renovation that we were doing, and one of the doors had not shown up. So the renovator put a piece of plywood in what was supposed to be the doorway, sealed it all up, and said, let's see how good this stuff is. And so he drilled some holes in it. So those are 5/8 holes on the left-hand side. One, he put a piece of drywall, the mesh tape over it. And then the one second from the right is a 1/4-inch hole, and then the one on the far right is an 1/8-inch hole. So as we were sealing, of course, the smaller the holes and, you know, the mesh tape, it sealed first, followed by the 1/8-inch hole, and then the 1/4-inch, and then the 5/8 hole. But you can see how it all seals up. The picture on the right-hand side That's a new house where the builder was using an exterior air barrier. So he was actually using a rigid foam material with the joints taped. This is where two walls came together. And so there was obviously some leakage that was getting out between those two walls. And so this is AeroBarrier sealing it up. You can see there's still some cracks in there because we're partway through the seal, and the seal, the joint has not completely sealed yet. Now I'll give you an idea of what kind of results we're getting. So this is a new house. So you can see on the right-hand side there, we've got the before sealing. So this is our initial blower door test. The house had 697 CFM of leakage, cubic feet per minute of leakage at 50 pascals depressurization. That is equivalent to an 84 square inch hole. So imagine a hole that is basically 8 by 10. And the house tested at 1.97 air changes per hour. That's really good. That builder was paying a lot of attention to detail. He had the house quite tight compared to building code type houses that are being built in Canada now. When we finished the process, we were down to 192 CFM of leakage and 23 square inch hole. So you think about that, it went from a hole that was essentially 10 by 8 to a hole that was 10 by 2. And the air changes dropped from 1.97 to 0.54. So it was better than a passive house, even though it was a conventional house. So a house that's this tight, of course, you're going to want to put in a heat recovery ventilator and have proper ventilation in the house. And you can see that we got a 72.5% reduction in the building envelope leakage. So that's pretty significant. This house is going to be with no drafts. It's going to just be a great house to live in. If you look at the graph on the other side, what we're plotting on the graph is essentially the CFM of leakage. So the amount of leakage. And then at the bottom of the graph is the sealing time. So you can see that we sealed on this house for about 2.5 hours. And you can see how the curve comes down fairly significantly in the beginning, and then it starts to plateau out. And this is basically the type of curve we see with all houses. At some point, we get to the point where, we're putting in time, we're putting in material, and we're not really getting much more. But we've never had a house yet that we have not been able to improve the air leakage by at least 50% from where we started. So here's another one. This is a renovation, and this is one where there was an addition built, and part of the house was renovated, but a significant portion of the house was not touched. So when they had the addition up, they were using poly as the air barrier. So we came in just after the drywall had gone on and before any other finishes were done. And the existing part of the house that had not been touched, of course, there was a lot of protection that had to go there on the floors, bathtubs, countertops, all light fixtures, all that type of thing. And the renovator did all that prep work for us, so we didn't have to charge the client for all of that. But you can see this house started off at about 5 times worse than the new house that we did at 3,471 CFM of leakage. And look at the square inch of the equivalent hole, essentially 42 by 10 or 10 by 42 inch hole. So that's like having a window open in the house all the time. And the house tested at 6.17 air changes per hour. When we finished, and you can see, if you look at the graph, you can see that we sealed for just over 4 hours. So 4.5 hours or so we were sealing on that house. And we were able to get it down to 1,400 CFM or 173 square inch hole. So that's roughly 17 by 10. So we went from 42 by 10 down to 17 by 10. So a smaller window now, still holes in the house, but a lot smaller than before. And we were able to get that house down to 2.55 air changes per hour and a 58% reduction in the envelope leakage. And then here's one where we which was what we would call a full gut renovation. So the renovators went in, they had taken down everything in the house, and they re-insulated and rewired and replumbed. And so there was a lot of work that went into this house, but basically everything was removed. All the furniture and everything, of course, would have gone out. People would have moved out. And so this one started off at 2,000 CFM of leakage, 242 square inch holes, so 24 by 10, and 3.55 air changes per hour. And when we finished after 5.5 hours, the leakage was down to an 80 square inch hole, so 8 by 10 from 24 by 10. And the air exchanges were down to 1.18 air changes per hour. So better than an R2000 house requirement in terms of that. And 66.7% reduction in building envelope leakage. So these are pretty significant numbers. In case somebody has a question about the spikes, you can see that there's some spikes there, and there was a pretty significant spike on the one that we've done before. What those spikes are basically is us going in to check. So when we open the door and walk in, it records that spike. All of a sudden, the air leakage in the house goes pretty much off the chart because the door's wide open for, the 3 seconds that it took us to get in and get out. So that's how tight we're monitoring these things as we're doing the seal. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening to me. And if you've got questions, I think you can put them in the chat. By all means, come to our website at airtighthometech.ca. And we're going to have a brand new website. It's being worked on now. We should have that within 6 weeks. And we're also on YouTube, and we're on Instagram.
Thanks so much, Gary. Great presentation. Nice to learn a little bit more about the building science. Interesting that it was started in Canada, and really good, well to explain, the ACH, and we've got quite a few folks who kind of understand that already, but it's nice to kind of go over that. There were a few questions, so let's kind of roll through them a bit rapid fire.
Sure.
Alf Main is wondering, how long does it take to complete the full house applying the air barrier?
Well, normally on a new house, we're somewhere around 3 hours. You can see that on the renovations, we went as long as, we went over 5 hours on the one. But normally on new housing, we're a little bit faster than we are with renovation.
Great. There were a few questions about what it's made of. So one person says, what's the sealant made of? Another's asking, is it toxic? And Lisa's wondering, what is the suspension solvent of this product? So we could kind of roll those 3 questions into one.
Sure. The material is it is Green Guard certified, so the material is non-toxic. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't want to breathe this stuff in because it, like I say, it's like sticky dust, and it's actually manufactured by a well-known paint manufacturer, and so that's what gives it its air suspension factor. So it will hang in the air for quite a while. I mean, a lot of paints, like when people are painting, you want a very low air suspension factor because you don't want to spray the paint into the room and have most of it hang in the air. In our case, we want it all to hang in the air as long as possible so that the fan can grab it and carry it off to the holes that we're trying to seal.
Yeah, absolutely. Brent's wondering, is there any residual material on walls, floors? Does the carpeting have to be covered?
Yes, all of carpeting would have to be covered. Floors need to be covered. So in new housing, typically we're going in after the drywall has gone on and the drywall has been sanded. And we usually tell the builder to leave the drywall dust on the floor so that any of our material that falls out of the air and lands on the floor gets caught in the drywall dust, and it makes it actually easier to clean the drywall dust up.
Interesting. So there's a few people who are just wondering about pricing. Obviously, it's going to depend on how big their homes are, but just a quick idea about the pricing or how people can kind of maybe get a quick quote. Is that something they want to reach out to you for?
Well, they can certainly reach out for us. We'll give you a quote. We need to do a takeoff on the house before we actually do the seal, because we need to know the square footage of the house and we need to know the volume of the house. So for purposes of pricing, calculate the floor area of the house the same way a real estate agent would. So if you've got a 2-story house, it's the floor area of the upper story and the main story, not including the basement. So, and then multiply that by somewhere between $1.50 and $1.75 a square foot, and that's what AeroBarrier works out to.
Okay,
so we
great.
do the basement, of course, as part of the house, but that's not taken into account when we do our pricing.
And a few people were wondering about older dwellings, like kind of buildings that are over 50 years old. Would it work in those?
It would work in those. The best time to do that is if you're doing a renovation. So if you want to just seal the house prior, like without doing any renovations, that's going to be fairly expensive because of the amount of preparation that we have to do to protect everything that's in the house, all of the finishes. So if you've got a renovation planned anyway, when the renovation is underway at the appropriate time, we could come in and seal the house. And as you can see, we can make it pretty much as airtight as a brand new house.
Yeah, absolutely. A few people are wondering, how long does the sealing last? What is the lifespan of the product? Is it kind of 25 to 50 years, or what? How long can folks expect that to last?
Well, the product has gone through accelerated aging, so we're pretty confident that it will last for at least 50 years. And just keep in mind that back in the early days of R2000, that same question was being asked about the air barriers that we were using there. And we've gone back and retested R2000 houses after 20 years, and those houses have all held their air tightness very well. So I'm confident that that AeroBarrier, because remember, AeroBarrier is not it's not the air barrier of the house. It's enhancing the air barriers that were put in there. So how long does plywood last? How long does polyethylene last? You know, how long does rigid foam last? So all of those materials are going to last for a very long time. And what our material is doing is it's helping to bridge the gap between those materials. And so I believe that ours is going to last a long time too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And there's a few other questions into chat. Sorry we weren't able to get to all of them. Encourage folks to reach out directly to Gary if they want specific questions. I'll get you out of here on this one. There's one last from John, and this kind of segues into our next presentation well. He has newer double hung windows, natural finished wood on the inside. How does the product work sealing around windows that operate?
Well, the operational part of the window, if the window is an older window, let's say it's a renovation, we'll actually tape around the operational part of the window so that we're not leaking through there. In today's modern windows, a high performance window is going to have very low air leakage through it because that window has used better quality weather stripping and the like in order to make the window more airtight. So a fixed window will always be more airtight than an operable window. But today's modern windows are super good. You know, they're very good. So like I say, an older window, we're going to tape it up so that we don't get the AeroBarrier material in there because it's going to cause the window to stick. And so we don't want to have to come back and clean that up. We want the window to stay as an operable window for the people that are living there.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Well, thanks so much, Gary. Really appreciate the time. I know there's a few other questions in chat there, so if you have time, you probably will get a few notifications from people kind of asking some questions. Thanks to Scott again for jumping on some of those little bit more technical questions. Really appreciate the presentation. Just a reminder to stop share as we roll on to our next one, and for folks to reach out to Gary at the airtighthometech.ca, and I did share that link into chat. So once again, Gary, thanks so much for joining us and shedding a little bit of light on air tightness, insulation, and that amazing new product, AeroBarrier.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. I really appreciated the invitation, and I enjoyed doing it.
Absolutely. And Gary's one of our SmartNet Alliance members as well. So you can head over to our SmartNet Alliance membership page to see a little bit more and then check out his new website that's coming soon as well. So let's segue into windows and doors. I think it's a good way to move over. And we've got Steventhwaites who's with us now, and he works with Dahlman Pro on condominium windows and doors replacement projects. Well, it's true that he's always surprised when apparently otherwise intelligent people tell him he understands windows. It's also true that over the years he has applied applied his technical training to a number of leading-edge window projects. So besides his project work, Steven's also a member of 2 of CSA's window standard subcommittees, helping to revise the standard to meet future requirements. And when it comes to energy efficiency, he also likes to walk the talk, which is great. That's what we like here. At home, he's reduced his space heating requirements by 75%. So the city of Ottawa will be happy with you there. And at the cottage, he has a garden shed with triple glazed windows. So that's great. Welcome in, Steven. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Retrofit Webinar Series. Take it away for windows and doors, and you can share your screen there.
Coming up?
Yeah, you'll just need to go into slideshow mode. Yeah, perfect. It just went in. Thanks, Steven.
So, yeah, I'm starting off with kind of a technical word here. Fenestration is a fancy pants word for windows and doors. There's lots to talk about with windows and doors, but I'm going to concentrate on the energy part of windows and doors. But certainly if you've got questions about other aspects, as time allows, maybe we can get to them. So just Gary started us off with some good stuff about building envelope. This slide is kind of like a poor man's energy simulation for your house. So just to give you an idea of the relative importance of insulating value of windows versus walls, assume for a second, this is a bit of an academic exercise, but it's still kind of useful. You've got a building where 10% of the vertical surfaces are windows and 90% of the vertical surfaces are what you would call a wall, an opaque area. So a lot of houses in Ottawa might have at least LowE in them if they're, if the windows came from the 80s or later. So R3 might be a reasonable number to pick for the windows. And if you've got 2x6 walls, including the framing, R15, that might be reasonable. If it's an older house, before the 80s, this would be a little high. But anyways, if you have this for 10% of your wall area and this for 90% of your wall area, on average, your wall area is around 11. So you can see that the windows, even though they're a small part of the area, are pulling this number down. So if you say, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to make my wall insulate twice as well. So 10% of your wall area is still R3. Most of your wall area is R30. And you can see you go from 11 to 16. You're adding R15 here, but you're only going up R5 overall, because congratulations, you just made something that's not the weakest link in the chain stronger. So if on the other hand, you say, you know what, my windows, they're due to be replaced. I'm tired of looking at them, tired of cleaning them, so we'll go and get a new window, triple glazed, this is in the range of reality. Walls stay the same, and we pick up an additional overall on the whole wall R2, even though we've only touched 10% of the wall area. And of course, if you're in a position to do both, you can see you make the biggest difference of all. So if you think you want to make your walls insulate better, it makes the most sense to do it if along the way you make the windows insulate better. But that kind of a chat sort of gets you thinking about windows and their characteristics when it comes to heat loss. What's different about windows than any other building envelope component is that there's two-way heat flow. There's solar gain from the sun, and there's losses from the inside out. We characterize the heat gain with a fancy pants word called solar heat gain coefficient. This number ranges from 1 to 0. 0 is solar heat gain coefficient of a wall. 1 would be, if you could have such a thing, a window without glass, or if you will, an open window. So even glass is not perfectly transparent. The solar heat gain coefficient is not the same as a visible transmissivity. If you think of an electric, if you have an electric stove, as you turn the element on, there's heat that comes off the element before there's light. And so the solar heat gain coefficient captures all of the heat that comes from the sun, some of which is not light. And this may make more sense later, a few slides later, or maybe it won't. The heat loss is characterized, depending on what version of a coefficient you want to use, either as U, and the trick with U is the lower the better. If you go to a building supply store, generally the prominent number on a package of insulation is the R value, and there, bigger is better. So these are the inverse of each other. So if you have an R value of 2, you have a U of 1/2, presuming that you're in the same either imperial or metric system. So the important thing here is to realize that windows are absolutely not walls. There's more to them than just heat loss. We have to consider the heat gain when we're talking about overall efficiency. So let's just start with the glass. So I sort of jumped into this really quick, but it's pretty hard to look for a window, to talk to someone about a window, if they don't talk about LowE glass. LowE glass is regular glass with a metal coating on it. The metal coating is so thin that you can see through it. The active layer is a layer of sputtered silver, but there's preparatory layers and covering layers. Altogether, there's probably about 5 layers of metal in any one LowE coating. But what gets lost in the wash is, in general, there's 2 different types of LowE. And this is not an artificial delineation. You can see that one kind of LowE has about, in super round numbers, almost twice the heat gain of another one. So this one lets in more free heat from the sun. This one lets in less free heat from the sun. The really cool thing about LowE is that it doesn't change the light transmission or the solar energy transmission in the visible spectrum, if you want to get all highfalutin about it. This is important because, you know, in the good old days, if you wanted to cut down on solar gain, you needed to use bronze or gray glass, and part of that bargain was quite a bit lower number here. So you controlled the heat from the sun, but you lost light. And so you can see when you move from double glazing to triple glazing, there is, you know, some reduction in the amount of heat that makes it through, that the second LowE coating blocks out a little bit more. But again, not a dramatic, like even here, the glass doesn't look dark. So the important thing here is that, you know, you can have different effects on the solar gain without having a big effect on the light. So what about the heat loss? So this is again what you saw on the last slide. This is solar heat gain. And this is the insulating value of the double glazed options and the triple glazed options. So for reference, if you have an older house, in the chat when I was watching earlier, seemed people had sort of houses from the 70s, 60s and earlier, those windows would probably be around R2. So, but you know, these days, if you were going to the trouble of replacing a window, if it was me, I would ask for the price on this, and then, you know, is it really that much cheaper to go double glazed? The industry's got done a lot better at automating this process, and the incremental cost between these two is quite a bit lower than it used to be. You can see here that these different solar heat gain coefficients have slightly different insulating values. So this one lets in more heat than this one, but this one insulates better. So then the question is, well, which one do I buy? You know, and if this was the extent of our rating system for windows, it'd be like trying to buy a refrigerator knowing how well it's insulated as one number, and what the compressor efficiency was as another number. And there's just no amount of human intuition that seems to get this balance right. So the good news is you don't need to use intuition. And we'll come to that in another slide, but just so you understand where the U of the window comes from, we divide the window in North America. It's a little different in Europe, not much, but a little different. We divide the window into 3 zones. We calculate the insulating value of each zone, the middle of the glass, the edge of the glass, the edge of the glass, and the frame. We area average these together, and that's how we get the overall of the window. Now, it turns out that you need to know the window properties to buy a window. You shouldn't be buying a window from the glass properties. There's just too much heat loss going on here that can affect this, that affect the overall heat loss for this to give you the true picture. And so some of you are probably wondering, what the heck, edge of glass? So this is, okay, let me back up a sec. So at the edge of a triple glazed or a double glazed unit, there's these little things, these separators. The industry cleverly calls them spacers. Gosh, I wonder where they got that name from. And it turns out that this material here has a big effect on the conductivity of the frame, but also affects, you can follow the arrow here, this region that's sort of beside it. And I love this picture because in the good old days, most windows had an aluminum spacer. And you're probably thinking, what the heck? But you know what? Aluminum, it's pretty durable. And so it was, for a long time, it was a choice. This is a double glazed unit with a foam spacer. Foam is about, a silicone foam spacer is about the best insulating space you can get. You can see in double glazing, it makes a difference. But you can see in triple glazing, it makes even more of a difference. And I want to keep moving on, but if you want to ask an interesting question, you can ask why Brian Mulroney was responsible for the invention of the foam spacer. So I must have been showing you glass before. So this is the effect on the whole window. And you can see these numbers are a little different than the ones we had before. And again, you know, what is the most energy efficient? And so I said you don't have to know. This is something called an energy rating. Like some of the technology that Gary talked about, this is uniquely Canadian, although the UK and Denmark have similar systems. Basically what it does is, on a heating season basis, it tries to give you an idea of the relative balance of gains and losses. And of course, because we have to make life more complicated, there's a fudge factor. So the gains are the solar gains, and the losses consist of the conduction losses through the window, as well as the air leakage on a seasonal basis. Just because I don't think any presentation is complete without a numerical equation, I decided to throw this in. So this is the average solar gain on an average bit of wall in Canada over a heating season. It's roughly 72 watts. This is a reduction because, you know what, some windows are shaded and we should probably take that into account if we're going to be using a very general number to help people make window decisions. And so very simply, these numbers are multiplied by the solar heat gain coefficient, and this is the average hourly gain over a 210-day heating season. The losses depend on the average temperature difference. This is a Canadian average because this is a number to help Canadians buy windows, times the insulating value of the window. Turns out, as Gary said, with new windows, this is a very small number. Whether it's a hinged window or a fixed window, sliders, it might amount to 1, but look, we're adding 40 to the darn number. And again, if you feel like asking questions and making Nick do some work, we can talk about why that number is there. But like any rating system, it comes with some things you need to be careful about. This is a heating season number. It's not a cooling season number. Now, with climate change, the cooling season is increasing, but even under the most dire predictions, our heating season will still be by far our biggest consumer of energy relative to the cooling season. So in most cases, it's okay to make decisions based on this number. This was based on a normal house. This breaks down very quickly for, I can't use this in new condominiums where it's floor to ceiling glass. This depends, this all works out to be relatively true if you have a normal window area, not an excessive window area. The other thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, the impacts, but it's based on an average Canadian climate, which turns out to be pretty close to Ottawa. So this number, the average delta T, the average temperature difference over the heating season, turns out to be a good choice. But this is the average of north, south, east, west. So, it can help make you make the right decisions, but if you're a perfectionist, there's another layer, isn't there always another layer that you can drill down? So the energy rating combines the effects of the gains and losses. And so you can see here, I'm probably going a little bit over, but I'll try and do this relatively quickly. So these are the numbers that we saw before. So this lesser insulating double glazed window for an operator, that's what this number is, actually has a higher energy rating. So that means that even though this window doesn't insulate as well as this window will give you the lower heating bill. And the same is true with triples, is that the high solar gain glass, the one that has the higher solar heat gain coefficient, has a higher energy rating. These second row of numbers here, it's the blasted window industry. Nothing is ever completely simple. These numbers are based on, a casement that's roughly 2 feet by 5 feet. But most fixed windows are bigger than 2 feet by 5 feet. And so this is based on a window that's 4 feet by 5 feet. So some of this is coming from the fact that there's more glass. The energy efficient part of this window is not the frame or the edge of glass, it's the center of glass. So the smaller the frame, the more of the good stuff you have, the higher energy. There is no window that I know of where the frame insulates better than the glass. And since this is, a mathematical equation, you can say, well, how, if I had a 2x6 wall, what would the energy rating of the wall would be? And you go, well, that's easy to figure out. The insulating value of the wall, and the solar heat gain coefficient, that would be 0. So you can see that there are some window choices that are actually more energy efficient than the wall. Now, don't go crazy. This doesn't mean that your whole house can be windows and it'll be more energy efficient. Remember, this whole thing was based on assumption of relatively normal window areas. But it's still an interesting thing to keep in mind. It adds perspective. If you have an eye for detail, you'll recognize that, we had this number 72 in the ER equation for the average solar gain. But in Ottawa, this is what our solar gain is on the south. This is what it is on the east and west. And on the north, it's not 0, but it's pretty low. And so when you start, I think I got this a little bit too detailed to follow, but the short story is, for a south-facing window, without a doubt, you should be using the high ER, the solar gain glazing. But for the east and west, particularly in the summertime, which this rating doesn't occur, this is where you're prone to overheating. And for the east, west, and north, my advice, not seeing your house, which is always dangerous, would be to get the higher insulating solar shade window here. It may not have the highest energy rating. And then for the south, use the high solar gain. Coming to the end here, Nick. So I've touched on some of this before. What else affects ER? So if you have a metal spacer in here, you shouldn't be surprised to find the product has a lower ER than an insulating spacer. An insulating spacer here, the foam spacer, adds about 2 on the ER scale compared to a metal spacer. Hollow vinyl frames insulate a little better than wood frames. If someone's saying they've got insulation in their frame and it insulates better, therefore their product is better, yeah, you know, if it's a triple glazed product, they may have a point. But if it's a double glazed product, they're probably stretching the truth. Besides energy performance, there's some comfort advantages of triple glazing. You know, in the late 80s, I got to a point where I wouldn't want to talk somebody into a patio door unless it had LowE in the double glazing. And now I'm pretty close to the point where, for comfort reasons alone, forgetting all the energy stuff we talked about, if someone wants a new patio door, I'm going to try hard like crazy to convince them to go triple glazing, because if this surface is cold, it's exactly like a negative campfire. And if this surface is cold, there can actually be a draft, even though there's no draft through the window, because this is cold relative to the room. Natural convection will mean you'll get an ankle draft just from the fact that this is not insulating well. And this is exceptionally normal in a lot of the new condos. Because I like this much, threw it in twice. Imagine you get this much condensation on your window now with an aluminum spacer. This is a good little pictograph to give you an idea of the possible reduction in condensation you'll get by using a warmer edge, a warmer spacer, in both double and triple glazing. Getting really close to the end here, Nick. So a couple things, 4 things to remember. Windows matter. You know, they're a small part of the building envelope, but there's a disproportionate amount of the heat loss that goes out them. Windows are not walls. There is a solar gain that comes in through them. And in a heating climate like we have in Canada, it's almost always a good thing. Not all LowE is the same. There's a wide variation in solar gain. And so you should consider glazing by orientation. Ottawa is kind of tough in the replacement window market to do this because not very many of our streets are oriented correctly. But if you've been in your house for a few years, you probably have a good idea where your overheating is coming from when the afternoon sun is low in the sky, and where you could take advantage of the solar gain. And so that is about it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stephen. Yeah, great to shed some light, so to speak, on some of those window issues, and some great knowledge there. And you know, now people, when they're looking at the energy ratings, will hopefully have a little bit more understanding. A few questions here. I know some of them were kind of going around in chat. We had some questions, but I'm curious to get your take. Tim was wondering, why are double glazed windows the norm in Canada and triple glaze is a premium product, whereas in Europe, triple glaze is the norm and double glaze is frowned upon? Some thoughts there?
Triple glazing is probably more prevalent in new windows than most people realize. Things are changing, but you know, we've had cheaper energy for a longer period of time. The window market in Europe is very different from the window market in North America. In Europe, people tend to stay in their houses, and they make very different decisions about what is quality, even different from just the pure energy side of it. So it would be normal for a European window to cost 2 or 3 times as much as a normal North American window. And so that's probably part of it as well.
Yeah, I think some of the folks in chat were sort of saying energy costs for sure. Mary's wondering, what is the best gas as an insulator for windows?
Oh, I left that one out on purpose. Okay. So I didn't tell you guys this, but all of those numbers for LowE double or triple glazing included gas. it's so inexpensive that it's pretty well an automatic with LowE these days. Argon, if the window has room for a 1/2 inch space between panes, whether it's double or triple, argon is what you want. If you have a narrow space, you may want to consider the extra cost of Krypton. Krypton in a 1/4 inch insulates about as well as argon in a 1/2 inch. Krypton in a 1/2 inch insulates about as well as argon in a 1/2 inch. And those are the two common, and occasionally people will mix them together to try and reduce the cost of a partial Krypton fill.
Interesting. Lisa was wondering, can I ask if these figures were for wooden frames or for metal frame windows for some of your figures? What were you basing it on?
The full window numbers were based on a typical vinyl window, because that's by far the largest part of the replacement window market at the moment.
And Tim's wondering, does a high solar gain cost you in the summer? Because air conditioning costs? Yeah.
One of the advantages to living relatively far north is that we have a wide variation in the altitude of the sun at midday. So if it's a south-facing window, the sun is low in the sky during the day in the wintertime, and the solar gain is relatively high. If it's a south-facing window, in the summertime, the sun is high in the sky, and you get a fraction of the solar gain than you do in the wintertime through that south-facing window. Now, this isn't true for the east and west, and that's why I was suggesting a solar shade for those directions. But if you've got, southeast, and if it's not too big a window, maybe southwest, I would strongly consider a solar gain LowE coating.
That's great. And Craig was wondering, just speaking about kind of drapes and coverings, does it matter if you have a window that you often have heavy drapes over, or versus a window that maybe the drapes are open? Does that sort of play a factor usually in folks picking the windows?
Boy, there's a lot to unpack in that. So closing the drapes at night will help the window insulate better, but it'll make it more prone to condensation. So you're doing the right thing from your pocketbook point of view, but you might have to mop up some water in the morning. If you have the drapes closed during the day, you're going to reduce your solar gain a little bit. And you should probably, from a purely energy point of view, they should probably be open during the day and closed at night. Do you think I'm answering the question?
Absolutely. Someone's asking about skylight windows. Any tips for the best selection of skylight windows? Does that depending on where they're sort of putting them?
Oh man, am I allowed to be sarcastic?
These are tough questions, eh? I think we should start paying you for this.
If you like a hole in your roof, you should probably get a skylight, because the insulation value of that compared to the attic, which, usually you can, even in a retrofit, you can fluff it up to, pick a number, R50, R40, R50, R60. And the skylight at best is going to be R4-ish, maybe 5-ish if it's triple glazed. The thing about skylights, so when you say what the average, remember what I said about frame, edge, and center of glass. So if someone produces a skylight that's triple glazed and it's an average R value of 5, there's some areas of that skylight that are a lot less than 5. And so, boy, oh boy, you got to be careful with condensation. I got to the point in the early 90s that I just said, I don't want to be associated with skylights anymore. So you're kind of asking the wrong person.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, you gotta make that stand, right? Quick one: does PVCU mean vinyl in Canada? The CU, does that represent?
The U is supposed to mean unplasticized, so that it won't start off relatively soft and get relatively hard as plasticizer migrates out of the PVC. But it's more of a marketing term than a reflection of the actual formulation of vinyl that's used in windows.
Okay, great. Janice has got a couple questions. She's wondering, do you ever recommend magnetite as a way to improve existing windows without replacing them?
Yes.
Great. And she's also wondering, have you heard of anyone using light zone R12 windows with many layers of plastic film between the layers? Glebe Community Center has had a good experience apparently on this.
Yes, we're talking with them. So I think it's a relatively good product. It insulates really well. I think it's actually a second generation product, so they learned a lot from the mistakes of the first generation. One of the challenges is that it requires kind of a different window frame. I don't know how to do this without getting all jargony on you, but one of the commercial frames that we use that does have a passive house version, in other words, a mega thermal break, can accommodate light zone glass. So if you're serious about it, the stuff is not free. It's a long way from free, but there's a lot of advantages to it. Yeah, my email address is there.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely reach out. Anna's wondering about the plastic insulation film that's available at many stores that a lot of folks do in November. Do you find that that's even worth it? You know, everybody's out with their hair dryers and stuff, and is that something that you recommend to people, or is it just time to replace your windows?
No, I think it works. It can help both with conduction loss and air leakage. So one of the tricks that I did in my place, I live in a condo. I don't really have control over the windows. They went in the early 90s, they're double glazed. And so I very laboriously took some screen frames and attached some of that film to it. So I've made myself removable interior storms that I put in the wintertime just because I am who I am. I'm not going to recommend that to anybody, but you know, unless you're crazy. But the film does work. Normally you just tape it to the window. And sometimes when you take it off, a little bit of paint comes with the tape, but you know, that film can work a miracle on a really crappy window.
Great. And I've got one last question here, and then we'll let you take a little bit of a break, maybe get into chat. I'm sure folks will want to sort of direct message you. Shelley's wondering, what is the difference between hard and soft LowE options?
Oh my gosh.
I know, so, good questions, right?
Essentially, hard coats are solar gain LowEs. There's one minor exception, but you won't see it residentially in Canada. And soft coats they can be high solar gain, or they can be shade LowEs. The hard coats are made, the LowE is put on while the glass is floated, while the glass is created, and coating is really hard. Like if you run an X-Acto blade across it, the mark you see is bits of X-Acto blade that have been knocked off by the coating. The soft coats have a lot more flexibility in the way they're formulated, and they're made in a vacuum chamber. They require a little more care and handling, but you know, soft coats have been around in the Canadian window industry since the late 80s, so like people know how to handle them.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Stephen. Really appreciate it. You really shed quite a bit of light on Windows. And, you know, I know we've got this recorded, so if folks want to go back and kind of take notes, we will be distributing this later. Really appreciate your presentation. And, yeah, thanks so much for being here and just giving us a little bit of knowledge. And, you know, we know there's quite a bit of curiosity around, you know, people getting more energy efficient windows. So thanks for helping to satisfy some of that knowledge. Great. Well, we do have a couple more presentations coming up. I do also want to mention that we do have a survey going around. The City of Ottawa has got a survey on these retrofit webinars. So we want to know, you know, what potential topics do you want to hear next as we continue on in this quarterly series. We want to hear about, you know, how you got to know how you got to know about the webinar. And so if you do have a few minutes and you can open up that link, that would be great to share some some knowledge there on the survey. So next up, let's bring in our next speaker. And now we've got Joshua Reinhardt, who is a licensed master electrician, engineer in training, and the founder of PG Electrical Solutions. And PG Electrical Solutions is a full-service electrical contracting firm focused on helping clients power their next project. They do it all, be it EV chargers, solar installs, building renovations, renewable energy storage, or most importantly, and what we're going to talk about tonight, electrical panel upgrades. Josh has extensive experience in both grid-connected and off-grid electrical systems. His favorite projects include energy metering, battery technologies, photovoltaics, and building performance simulation. Josh is passionate about renewable technologies and about helping others reduce their need for fossil fuels. So come on in, Josh, share your screen, and let's talk a little bit about, I know it's something we get on every episode, is like, you know, what do I have to do to my panel? Because I know many people do. So come on in there, you'll be able to unmute yourself and start sharing your screen.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're all good. Thanks so much, Josh.
Right on. Good evening, everyone. How are we all tonight? Hope we're all doing well.
Yeah, everyone's muted, so they're going to nod their head that they're doing good. We don't see your screen yet, Josh, so if you want to just share that, and then you're good to roll.
Yeah,
perfect.
Can you see that now?
That's coming up. Take it away.
Okay.
Thanks, Josh.
Perfect. So I'm super excited to be here tonight and want to thank SmartNet Alliance for inviting me to speak with you all this evening. It's been an informative series of presentations so far, and I'm really hoping I can contribute a bit to everyone's experience. There we go. Next slide. That works. So yeah, as Nick mentioned, I'm Josh from PG Electrical Solutions. I'm a master electrician with a decade of experience in commercial and residential electrical contracting. A recent graduate from Carleton University. I went back to get my engineering degree, but I'm here tonight to talk to you about panel changeouts and service upgrades. So 2 years ago, I started PG Electrical Solutions, and we operate throughout the Eastern Ontario region. And since inception, we've tackled all sorts of projects. You can see, you know, like Nick mentioned, energy metering, storage, panel changeouts, EV chargers, smart homes, and everything else. That's why we were really excited to hear about Ottawa's Better Homes program that was announced recently. And we're looking forward to helping out with some retrofit projects. So everyone here is obviously pretty keen on finding out more about retrofits, energy audits, funding, and you're probably wondering like what an electrician can do to help, but you may or may not be aware that a significant number of the eligible retrofit projects actually probably involve an electrician. So maybe you're planning to waterproof your basement or change out your hot water tank, upgrade that sort of inefficient piece of equipment. Maybe you're thinking about some PV panels or a net metering installation. You know, it really depends what you've targeted with your retrofit strategy after consulting with your energy advisor. A few of the other projects I've heard about are battery systems, electric vehicle chargers, and heat pumps. Most of these actually require an electrician. A few of them, like the mechanical systems especially, you might have someone within the company that's going to help you out with that. But most of these require at least an electrician on site to help install the equipment, if not an electrician to be involved in reviewing your existing electrical panel. So you're considering all of this, you've got your retrofit plan put together, and you're ready to start calling contractors, but I'd encourage you to hold on. Just pause a minute, think. Maybe give me a call, 613-690-6339. Find out if you need an electrician. Before you call me, you might want to do a bit of homework yourself and find out exactly what you've got in your house. So the first spot you should look is your electrical panel. And you can have a quick look around, you can do some detective work, and you can see what is in your house. You might have an extensive system like this house with an old generator and a large panel and 100 amp service. Or you might have a really old fuse panel that looks something like this, with a 60 amp service and a couple of fuses. Every time something trips, you got to go in and change out one of these little things. There's not a lot of room in this box for an electric vehicle charger. Maybe you've got something that looks like this. This looks okay. You know, I've seen a lot of panels like this in people's houses. The challenge is that there's not a lot of space in this panel. So again, you might require an upgrade to your electrical panel or you might require a secondary panel. So what do you need to ask yourself to really find out? Do I need an electrician? Do I need a panel upgrade? Well, you start by looking at your breaker. So open up the door of your electrical panel. Don't get out a screwdriver. If you need a screwdriver, you probably need an electrician. But you can open the door, and on the handle of your electrical main service breaker or on the main disconnect, there's usually a number. So if you can see on this picture here, this is a 100 amp breaker. Some panels have a label inside that show what the panel is rated for as well. You can see here, this is a 100 amp panel. So even if the copper coming into your house or the aluminum coming into your house was large enough that you could actually find a bit more room on your electrical service, this panel is not rated for 200 amps. So the next thing you want to ask yourself is about that electrical service. Where do the wires come into my house? Are they coming overhead from an electrical pole? Can I see the transformers on the road? Or is my electrical power coming in underground? So if you have an underground service, this becomes a much larger project if you need an upgrade. You might want to hold off on doing the upgrade or plan to do it at the same time as you're doing other excavation work around your house. So when you're waterproofing that basement or putting in a new deck, those are great times to also plan to upgrade the service of your house. So the next thing you want to ask yourself while you're doing your homework, being a bit of a detective before you call someone, is what size panel do I actually need? This is really a pretty easy question to answer. If you have a 60 amp panel and you need a service upgrade, you should just spend the extra little bit up front and go to a 200 amp service. 100 amps was pretty common for the past 20, 30 years. You know, people had a few electrical appliances. Now we're starting to see larger things like induction stoves, maybe some air conditioners in your house, maybe you got a hot tub in the backyard. But as we start to come up with these new heat pumps and electric vehicle chargers, you really start to run out of room on a 100 amp service. So you might want to consider upgrading to a 200 amp service. If you have an existing 100 amp service and your panel is just too small, you might not need a service upgrade. When you change out that panel though, think about getting a tub or the box for the panel rated for 200 amps. You can always put in a 100 amp main breaker, which you can see at the top of this panel, and keep the tub rated for 200 amps. So down the road, when you plan to do that upgrade, you don't need to change the panel again. If you're planning an energy storage system though, you might need to do a bit more of a detailed analysis. Perhaps you're looking at putting in a battery bank, and at that point, you really want to decide which loads in my house do I want to back up, how much power is required, and how long do I want to power it for. Well, at PG Electrical Solutions, we're proud to provide energy monitor rentals, sales, installation, as well as battery bank sizing services. Here you can see a home's energy usage over 9 months. I installed these meters at a friend's house in January, and we measured what was going on in their place over almost a full year so that we can size an energy storage system for them that will be able to provide backup power for 8 hours. The next thing you're going to want to consider is how much you should budget. That's a popular question, and it's a reasonable one. Capital planning is pretty important when you start to think about how to upgrade your electrical service or any other system in your house. Now, if you've got an existing 100 amp service and you just need a little bit of extra room to maybe pick up that new air conditioner or something like that, a sub panel might be okay, or a simple tub swap out. And that can be pretty affordable. It can start around $700. You're paying someone to come in and change something out mostly. As you start to require a service upgrade though, you really need to start to allocate a bit more capital to the project, especially if it's an underground service. You might even need to go up by an order of magnitude on that and start to budget into the $7,000 range, depending on what's required. It is a case-by-case basis, depending on where your electrical meter is, if there's a disconnect, if you have an overhead service, an underground service, some of those things that we've already reviewed a little bit. But once you put the time in, planned, allocated the capital, in the long run, you'll end up with a brand new panel. So you'll have that 200 amp service, you'll have lots of space for future expansion. Maybe you want to put in your class 2 or class 3 EV charger, or you want to put in a brand new Mitsubishi Zuba heat pump like I'm just doing at my house right now. And so you'll have the space for that, right? You'll be able to power whatever you need in the future with that 200 amp service. And you might even decide that you want to install an energy meter permanently, like I have at my house, so that you can see what's using power when, and really get a better sense of your energy demand usage. And tomorrow you'll have a greener, better home. So thanks a lot for inviting me to speak on panel changeouts tonight. I really appreciate SmartNet Alliance inviting me to come talk to you. And yeah, I'm available if you have any questions, reach out. I'm happy to provide information. I want to remind everyone, always check if the electrical contractor you've hired is licensed and registered with the ESA. Make sure they have insurance. And when someone's doing electrical work on your home, before they finish and you release that final 10% holdback for the project, ask them for a copy of the notification. Make sure that they pulled a permit and make sure that they offer you a copy. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks, Josh. A few questions kind of trickling in. I know you touched on budget. James was just wondering, what is the general budget cost to upgrade from a 100 amp panel? Is that something you have to kind of see each job, or is there sort of a ballpark that you can give folks?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, it really depends if you have that overhead or underground service, as well as what size those existing service conductors are. If you've got an overhead service and the conductors are probably like a, number 1 aluminum, number 2 copper, you won't need as much capital as if we've got to do a trench all the way from the street to your house. But it really is a case-by-case basis. Quotes are free, get 3. I always encourage that as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to keep up with the questions because they're rolling in pretty quickly here. Craig's wondering, do you ever need more than 200 amps?
There's definitely the sort of unique situation if you have a very large home, or if you've got a lot of special equipment that you would need a 400 amp service. We are starting to see those installed in more homes, especially, if you drive along Rideau River Road down that way, you see some of those much larger homes. A lot of them probably would have 400 amp panels. But for the average consumer, a 200 amp panel is sufficient to pick up your hot tub, your heat pump, your electric vehicle charger, and all your basic needs.
That's great. Tim's wondering, in a residential property, if solar or battery systems are being considered after renovation and panel upgrade, would it be wise to install a master 200 amp disconnect between the incoming mains and the panel?
Yeah, there's combination load centers, and then there's load centers with a separate disconnect. A lot of the times it makes sense to have things split out a little bit. So if you're planning to add a bunch of equipment, especially if you want something like an automatic transfer switch, it's a great idea to put in a few extra disconnects just so that you can isolate components.
Great. Richard's wondering, what is your take on the Power Perfect box? Is that something you have experience with?
I'm not familiar with that product, so I wouldn't want to speak on it. I can do some research, and if someone has any specific systems they want reviewed, feel free to email me and reach out, and I can look it up and provide some feedback once I review the specification sheets, though.
That's great. John Clark's wondering, an electric furnace uses 18,000 watts or 100 amps?
I think it depends on the system that you pick up. I know that the Zuba that they just installed at my house required a 100 amp breaker as well as a 40 amp breaker.
Great. Janice is wondering, can electricity miser equipment prevent the need to upgrade the service entry for EV chargers?
Electric miser equipment?
Electricity miser, yeah. I'm not sure that.
So there's a few YouTube videos, Facebook posts you'll find of all these fancy little pieces of equipment you can install on your house to reduce your electricity bills or find more space on your service. they really don't work like that. There's a difference between power factor correction and actual demand. So when we measure electricity, there's a few different ways to measure it. Real power, RMS power, true power, and then line and phase voltage and current. And without getting too technical, all I'll say is that most of the devices that you pick up at best are probably power factor correction devices, and they don't change the amount of power coming in or out of the system.
Great. Art Hunter's wondering, he has a level 2 flow EV charger, but would want to upgrade to V2G, two-way charger to connect his Tesla to 80 kilowatt per hour battery with his power wall. He's got solar net metering for 5 years and a 200 amp panel. Do you know when Ontario will be approving the V2G and which charger you would recommend with that?
I think Art, I've never met Art, but I am familiar with his house. He's a popular one on the Green Doors Open tour. And I think for his system, I'd want to spend a little bit of time reviewing exactly what he's got before I recommended a specific product. I've installed a lot of juice box chargers myself. I'm a really big fan of those, and I'm thinking about getting one for my place. But again, like for any specific system, especially ones that aren't available on market yet, I think it takes a specific review of the system you're installing it into.
Yeah, no, I know Art, and I'm sure he'd be happy to have you over at his place, and a lot of bells and whistles, fascinating microgrid home for sure. So put that on your calendar there for sure. Gaston's wondering, please tell us more about the requirements for EVC. For EVC,
sorry, can you just clarify the acronym?
Yeah,
there?
Gaston, maybe you want to jump into chat just to clarify that one, and we'll roll to the next here. Richard is wondering, what should typical future EV drivers consider when choosing an outdoor EV charger?
Some of the features that I look for with an EV charger are things like how much of functionality with your smart home it has. So depending what platform you're using, are you using Home Assistant? Are you using Zigbee? What are you using, and will that EV charger communicate with your smart home protocol? As well as, is it going to meet your future charging needs? Is it a class 2 or larger charger? And potentially there's a few in the pipeline now that should be coming out with bidirectional charging. So if you're not planning to install one today, it's sort of a 2-year planning stage. I might wait and see what products are available with that bidirectional charging.
Great. Earl and Annette are looking at solar-ready panels. Are they worth doing, or is that sort of just a sales thing? Solar-ready panels.
Have you heard of those? A solar-ready electrical panel, I think that's really more of a marketing thing than anything. Most solar installations for net meter these days are micro inverters, not string inverters, and they tie into your panel. Usually you need a bit of anti-islanding protection, but in terms of solar ready, that usually just means that there's space for solar equipment. Again, if there's a specific product though, I'm happy to review spec sheets and have a conversation, so you can always reach out to me.
Yeah, no, that's handy. Serge is wondering, is installing a heat pump for heating and one for hot water the best way to reduce the energy need for your house? Any thoughts on that?
I think that question might be better directed to some of the heat pump experts at SmartNet Alliance. I'm happy to review the electrical system, but I'd caution commenting on heat pumps specifically. Yeah.
And Anna's wondering, if we want to switch a gas water heater to an electric water heater, is that something we need an electrician and a plumber for? I'm sure you would know the electrician part.
Yeah, you would definitely need an electrician and a plumber. Now, again, there is a lot of mechanical companies in the Eastern Ontario region that have electricians on staff, master electricians, and they are registered to do that work, but you will need both an electrician and a plumber. You can't have a plumber do the work himself.
Great. Peter's wondering, he's got a 200 amp service, but his panel's full. Can the panel be expanded without increasing the amps?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did touch on that a little bit, but there is a solution for homes that have the service size they need and no space in the panel, which is a sub panel, or what's commonly referred to as a pony panel. So what that looks like is taking a few of the existing loads in the main panel, moving them over to a secondary device, and putting overcurrent protection for that sub panel in the main panel. And that's a common thing too with smaller 100 amp panels where we just need a little bit of extra room for that new system.
Great. And Gaston confirmed that EVC is electric vehicle charger. So let's just go back to his question here, quite far up. Tell us more about the requirements for that. Generally, they always need a 200 amp for an EV charger, unless it's the level 1 charger, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like a level 2 or higher, unless you really don't have much in your house and small square footage, you're going to need to upgrade your electrical service. So plan for that while you're planning on how you're going to pay for your new Tesla and all your energy retrofits. Make sure you allocate some of the budget towards that service upgrade. In terms of actual installation requirements, it's making sure that you have the space where you'd like the system to go and making sure that you have a master electrician do the work.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Josh. Really appreciate you coming on. Talking it's something that we sort of always touch on when we talk about home retrofits, when we start going down that path of renewable technologies and people are getting excited about getting EVs in the driveway and heat pumps going. So we know that, you know, the energy audit's sort of a precursor to a lot of it. And it sounds like the panel upgrade is also. So I encourage folks to reach out to you. Really appreciate it. I know you were at our sustainability showcase last fall, and we'll hope to have you there again. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate it. I'm a big fan of SmartNet Alliance, and you've definitely got a new member coming in for me, and I'd be happy to provide testimonials to anyone else thinking about joining. So, cheers. Awesome,
Josh. Yeah, we'll get you all signed up. Just a reminder to stop share there, and I'm sure you'll have some folks reaching out to you there. So thanks again to Josh. So I'm excited to bring in Scott Mayer, and Scott has been dutifully going through all the different chats in there and answering everything. He must be getting carpal tunnel syndrome by now. Scott's a registered energy advisor over at EnviroCenter, and he appeared on our very first Home Retrofit Webinar Series when we talked about energy audits. And he's going to just sort of sum things up from a building science perspective. So let's bring in Scott from EnviroCenter. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Nick. Appreciate it. And it is great to be back. It's always an amazing turnout at the SmartNet Alliance webinars and presentations, and also an amazing set of questions, really sophisticated questions that come pouring through. So it's definitely nice to be involved with another presentation here. And yeah, I've got a number of things to present on. I think a little bit on home insulation and the building science that goes along with that, as well as just touching on some of the incentive programs. So I'll try and move through as efficiently as I can, knowing that we don't have all night. So I will share screen here.
Great, it's just coming up right now, and yeah, you'll just need to get into slideshow mode. Yeah, you're all good to go. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Yeah, it always takes me a second to get there. So yeah, thanks again, everybody. So yeah, this is a little bit about home insulation and also some energy conservation programs that are active in the market right now. So just wanted to touch a little bit on the organization that I work for. So it's EnviroCenters. It's a non-for-profit environmental organization based in Ottawa. And EnviroCenter's mission is to provide people, communities, and organizations with practical solutions to light their environmental impact in lasting ways. So most of our programs and services have to do with reducing carbon footprints and reducing energy consumption, both in home energy programming as well as other community-based programs as well. So just sort of launching in here, into home insulation. Now, it was great, you know, Gary touched a lot on air leakage and the effects of air leakage and reducing air leakage and in energy consumption, and Stephen often obviously touched on windows and the importance of those vital components to a home in terms of maintaining and improving energy efficiency. And so I just wanted to touch on another kind of major component of the home envelope and products that will maintain and reduce energy costs in the home. And that is home insulation. So what are the benefits of home insulation? Most people are quite familiar with insulation, but to varying degrees. So One, obviously, we know that they're going to lower energy costs if we are adding insulation to a home. They also help to reduce our carbon footprints. And one other thing that's often kind of forgotten about is just better home comfort altogether. So when we're improving the energy efficiency of our home, not only are we reducing our costs and having a much better environmental impact, but also we're feeling those differences in the home every day. And right now, one of the bonuses of obviously extra home insulation is in some of the program rebates and incentives that are available. So how does insulation reduce heat loss? We know that, you know, when you put it in, then apparently you save energy. So why does that happen? So one of the key things to think about here is how heat moves in your home. And Gary did touch on this as well, as did Stephen in a couple of different ways, in that hot air does go up, but heat always moves from an area that's hot to an area that's cold. So in a house, even though warm air can rise, and Gary did touch on that in terms of how that increases the air leakage in a home, but heat can actually move in any direction. So it can move sideways, up, down. Basically, heat is trying to follow the path of least resistance. It's finding out which is the quickest route in terms of what is the coldest surface that it can be transmitted to. And heat can move in by means of convection, which is based on air currents. So like Gary talked about, where warm air is rising in a home, we actually call that a stack effect, or sometimes it's called a chimney effect, where warm air is rising and that's dragging in cold air from the lower levels of the home. So the other would be radiation, and Stephen did touch on that. When we're standing close to a very cold surface like a window, we lose heat from our bodies through radiation. So it's important to consider what kind of surfaces we're enveloping ourselves with in order to reduce that radiant heat loss. And also conduction. So, and conduction is obviously when you have heat that will be transmitted directly by molecules of heat through materials. So a good example of that is a cast iron pan. If you have a cast iron pan and you put it on your stove and the element gets hot, and then the pan gets hot, you touch the pan, you burn your hand. So that's heat actually through conduction right through the materials from molecules moving from one material to the next, or heating up within one material to the next. So heat can actually move in any of those directions and through any of those means. So what does insulation do? Insulation is going to help control that flow of heat. And in some ways it can do that in all of those ways: convection, radiation, and conduction. So like a down coat, heat will actually slow the rate of heat loss from your body. And in a home, it's an important part of the home envelope. So it's actually like that coat. It's intentionally wrapping your house as a shell with an insulating material that's going to slow the rate of heat loss from inside the house to the outside. So it's an important part of that envelope in reducing heat from where we want it to where we don't want it. And often the levels and the location of insulation impacts the performance as well. We'll talk a little bit about the locations, and then the levels. Obviously, the more insulation, typically the better, but can also be levels of insulation are affected by the kind of insulation as well. So not all insulations are created equally. And when we talk about different insulations, we usually find that they have different R values attached to them. So kind of important to understand a little bit about R values and what they mean. Stephen actually talked a little bit about R values and the fact that a U value is inverse, but to actually understand, well, what is an R value on its own? An R value is simply a measure of resistance to heat flow. So that's kind of what the R stands for in R value, is that resistance. So the higher the R value, the slower the rate of heat transmission through an insulating material. So by adding or improving the insulation in the materials within your home, you're going to increase the R values, and then you're going to be reducing the actual heat flow through those materials. Now, one thing to consider is that, again, you have different R values depending on the material. So a lot of us are learning more about spray foam insulation. There's cellulose, so loose fill insulation, and batt insulation, lots of different kinds of insulation. And each of those insulations, well, you can have different thicknesses of it, and you can increase the R value by increasing the thickness or the amount of insulation. And you can also increase the R value by changing the kind of insulation that you have inside your walls or outside your walls. So some rigid foams insulation will have, let's say, a higher R value than a batt insulation. Same thing with spray foam. So there's a higher R value per inch of material in some materials than others. So by changing the kinds of insulation and the amount of insulation, that has the distinct impact on the overall R values that you're having through your walls and ceilings and floors in some cases. So we're often wondering, what are the best places in the house to insulate? We can obviously insulate up in our attic spaces, so that's a pretty typical one, and it's a easy access typically. Most of our homes have an attic access hatch, unless we have cathedral ceilings, and that allows pretty simple access to actually increase the insulation levels in those attics. And we can use that again with various different materials, depending on the R values we're wanting to achieve, and also depending on the accessibility. So some attics are a little easier to lay batts down in than others, and some attics, there's not a lot of space up there, and all you could do is a loose fill insulation where you blow it in, and sometimes that's the best choice anyways. And then even spray foam installations are being used occasionally in attic spaces, and often in those cases may not be filling up the entire attic with spray foam, but potentially just adding a quick layer of spray foam insulation, and that just gives you an incredible air seal up in the attic, and then you can top up on top of that with either loose fill or batt insulation to get the overall R value. So you get the combination of air sealing as well as the insulating materials. Main walls, so those are often a little more challenging when we're talking about increasing insulation to the main walls. That could be a main floor, or a second floor, a third floor, depending on accessibility, and also depends on the age of the home and what might be in the walls to begin with. So typically homes that are over 70 years old now, so homes built sort of pre-1950, weren't insulated when they were built. Most homes built in the Ottawa area and starting in the 50s, that's when we started to look at actually adding insulation. So prior to that, if you have a home that's a 1920s home, there may actually be no insulation in those walls to begin with. So those are great options, and it actually can be quite convenient to blow insulation into the exterior walls of a home that has no insulation. Not as much of an option if you already have insulation in the walls, but you may be able to look at other situations, such as adding insulation to the exterior of the walls. And that's often done in conjunction with other kinds of renovations, such as increasing or changing your siding and veneers on the exterior of your walls. So it's kind of an added value in that way, that you can actually add insulation to the exterior using maybe some rigid board insulation, and also improving the curb appeal of the home at the same time. And then basement walls, obviously that's something that we may not think about immediately when we're thinking about adding insulation to our home, because it's the basement, and if it's not used as a primary living space, then we might just sort of discount the basement altogether and say, well, it's there's no point in heating that up. We don't spend a lot of time there. But when we consider the fact that in many basements they can account for 30 or more % of the heat loss in the home. So by leaving the walls uninsulated in a basement, yes, we may not be needing it for our own internal comfort so much because we don't spend a lot of time down there, but we are pumping a lot of heat down into the basement, which is actually just bleeding through an uninsulated basement wall. So the energy costs are significant for sure. And then another area that we're also looking at in terms of insulation opportunities would be exposed floors. So those are often floors that are over unheated spaces. So you might have a unheated crawl space, or you might have an addition out on piers where you've got an exposed floor. Sometimes there's, you know, 3-season rooms or old country kitchens that are built on the backs of the homes, and homeowners will create some living space out of those and forget all about the floors, except for they're uncomfortable. So those are good opportunities to actually add insulation, reduce energy costs, and also greatly improve home comfort as well. Another key area we see those would be sort of a room over a garage. And there may be opportunities to increase insulation, improve comfort levels there as well. So when we're planning our insulation upgrades, obviously there's a lot of different options, there's a lot of different products, and it's hard to know where to start when planning that journey. So I would definitely be recommending an energy assessment as the first step on that retrofit journey, to sort of look at the home in context, look at the different priorities, and work with an energy advisor to actually come up with the best strategies. So by having an energy assessment, you're going to increase your knowledge and confidence about the decisions you're going to be making about your home. You're going to have the data and have a critical analysis of how your home is performing or not performing. So it's going to help you determine how the home uses and loses energy, and then to plan a smart energy upgrade. So again, prioritizing the low-hanging fruit, focusing on the areas that are going to have the biggest bang for their buck. And then make those your primary objectives and work backwards from there, or forwards from there, I should probably say. And the energy assessments often function as sort of a long-term plan, right? You can't necessarily afford to do all of the energy upgrades at once, and that's not necessarily the right thing to do either. Sometimes you have to make sure that you're actually building a budget to do things right. So you're better off to sometimes hold off, make the right plan, and even if it takes a little longer, just do it right. So also the energy advisor is going to help you in that decision-making mode in terms of strategies and guidance to choose the right products in the right locations. So leaving off from some of the opportunities for insulation and a little bit of the building science around how insulation works, thought I'd just touch on a couple of the conservation incentive programs that are out in the marketplace right now, and obviously gaining a lot of interest. We're seeing a huge jump in the industry in terms of number of energy assessments associated with energy conservation programs right now. So that's a really great time to jump in to this arena and consider some of those upgrades for your own home. So one of probably the most known programs that's kind of taken off like gangbusters is the Natural Resources Canada Greener Homes Grant program. And this is a program that NRCan released May 27th, actually, of last year. And it does allow some retroactive clients. If you've had energy audits before May 27th of 2021, you may still be able to access the program as well. So definitely don't be disheartened if you've had an audit done a few years ago. So some of the rules and administration around the Greener Homes program, it is a grant program, so it is providing grants for energy upgrades, and some of the requirements are that you do have a pre and post retrofit energy audit or energy assessment completed. So the pre retrofit assessment is going to set a baseline for your house, and the post retrofit audit is going to basically account for all of the changes that you've made in your house over that time, and validate some of the grants and rebates that you might be entitled to. Now, in the program, homeowners can access up to $5,000 in grants for their energy upgrades, and also $600 in reimbursement towards the audit costs, which is fantastic. off the cuff, most combined pre and post audit energy assessments are going to run in that sort of $650 to $850 range. So that's a pretty significant reimbursement towards those audit costs. So not only are you qualifying for grants and rebates, but you're actually getting a pretty high value service when we talked about all of the advantages to having an energy audit done. And actually, you only need to complete one minimum upgrade measure in the program. So that stands out from some previous programs where multiple measures are required. In this case, only one is required in order to comply. And as far as homeowner eligibility goes, so you need to be a registered homeowner of the house, which means your name should be on the property tax bill for that home in the city of Ottawa or outskirts, or elsewhere, obviously in Canada. You also need to be a primary resident. So not only do you need to own the home, but you need to actually be living in the home. And in that case, multi-unit buildings are also eligible for grants. But if you're the owner of a multi-unit building, say a duplex or triplex or fourplex, you also have to be a primary resident of that building. So you have to be occupying one of those units. And important to note that the grants and reimbursements are after completion of the program, which means after your upgrades are completed and after your post-retrofit audit is completed and everything is tied together, that's when you would also be receiving your reimbursement for audit costs as well as the grants for the upgrades themselves. Just quickly touch on some of the upgrade measures and eligibility for the grants themselves. So when we're talking about insulation, grants and upgrades, minimum 20% of the area is required in order to qualify for a grant. So let's say it's a $1,000 grant to insulate your foundation walls. As long as you're doing 20% of your foundation walls, so maybe 200 square feet, then it will qualify for a grant. And those grants are prorated. So again, if you do 80% of the walls or attic or foundation, then you'd qualify for 80% of the available grants for that particular measure. And also concrete slab floors and exposed floors are also eligible for grants as well in terms of increasing insulation. So with your slab floor, you can add rigid foam below, which is pretty tricky, or you can add it above, and that'll qualify for grants as well. Air sealing as well. So again, Gary talked a lot about potential air sealing, and I would say that if you employed AeroBarrier in any of these projects, you would most likely qualify for an air sealing grant based on the metrics that he presented and the achievements that product can do. But basically, the grants are based on reducing air leakage in your home. When you do have a blower door test, we talked a little bit about that as well, and establish your air change rate for the home. Once you receive your reports, there'll be a target in terms of reducing air leakage. And if you actually can hit that target, then you qualify for the grants and for air sealing as well. And this can be a contractor completed project, or it can be a DIY project. But important to note that the grants for air sealing are only up to a value of the receipts provided. So if you did a lot of DIY air sealing, even if the grant was supposed to be $550 and you only spent $75 on some spray foam cans and some weather stripping, unfortunately, that's the limit to what you'd be qualifying for in terms of air sealing grants. However, if your air sealing is coming as a byproduct of your window installation or of your basement spray foam insulation job, things like that, as long as a contractor can itemize some of the work that they've done as air sealing, which obviously it is when you're having a window installation done, then the value of that associated cost can actually be granted as well through the air sealing grant. Windows and doors. So and Steve may be able to talk a little bit more to this as well in the QA, but there's basically two tiers that Windows would qualify for in terms of grants. And so the performance of the window basically determines the grant value. So And basically it's $125 or $250, depending on the performance of the window. And those are indicated by either the U value that Stephen talked a little bit about, or the energy rating. So it can be on either of those performance metrics. Any of the models that you've chosen have to be validated on the Enercan Energy Star database, and that's through Greener Homes. And also Energy Star labels and stickers must be left on the windows. So that's a new rule that Natural Resources Canada has levied. So very important, if you do have windows installed as part of the Greener Homes program, make sure the labels or stickers are left on the windows for your follow-up energy audit. There are some provisions, however, that you can actually take the photographs on behalf of the advisors. You can get them off the window if you're not having an audit done again for another 8 months, but that's something definitely to talk about with your energy advisor. HVAC and hot water. So important to note, there's no natural gas product options for HVAC and hot water. Heating equipment and hot water equipment must be on the Enercan Greener Homes database in order to qualify. And very specifically, heat pumps, for anybody who's interested in a heat pump, and maybe you're only looking at a mini split heat pump system that is really only supposed to take care of the back wing of the house. The heat pumps should be designed to service the entire home. So in those cases, if it's multiple heads of a heat pump system, there should be a minimum of one head on each floor in order to qualify for the grant. So the idea there is that the heat pumps are meant to take over the role of heating the home from what your pre-existing heating system is. And renewables, so solar, this again, probably where you're going to see Josh come into the picture, but excellent grants for solar installations, although they're very, very expensive projects. We are seeing a lot of uptake for renewables and solar through the Greener Homes project or program. Grants are $1,000 per kilowatt. A minimum of 1 kilowatt sized photovoltaic system must be installed to qualify. And the systems must be CSA approved and supplied or purchased in Canada. So actually the requirements are fairly minimal, relatively speaking, for renewables. Although I said they are, fairly expensive, but they have extremely fantastic long-term ramifications, especially if you are looking to look at heat pump systems for your house. So you're moving into an electrically heated home, or you're thinking about electric vehicle as well. So there's all sorts of side benefits to actually going with solar power as well. And unique in this program is that there's some resiliency measures that are qualifying for grants as well. So some waterproofing and roof membranes and solar batteries. So more we're talking about, very fluctuating climates and the impact and spin-off from that on homes in terms of resiliency when grids goes down and flooding and so forth. So Enercan is definitely making some concessions around that. And one big reminder for everyone is that in order for an upgrade to qualify for grants, the upgrade must be recommended on your home, your renovation upgrade report. So that's one of the reports that's provided by your energy advisor through this service. And it'll include sort of a starting point for the home and the final destination for proposed upgrades. But it will also include recommendations for each particular upgrade that is being proposed for your home. If it's not in this report as a proposed recommended upgrade, it won't qualify for an upgrade grant. So very important to communicate with your energy advisor about that, all the items that you are considering and that you might consider. So, and if you're really unsure, I would suggest tell the advisor to put them all on the report, because if you go ahead and change your mind halfway through your projects and you didn't include it originally in your report, then you could be out of luck for the grants. Enbridge also has a home efficiency rebate program, which is fairly similar, and it's a $5,000 worth of grants. But that would be for naturally gas heated homes only. So if you're an Enbridge customer, and the rebates are also for energy efficiency improvements, very similar to the Greener Homes program in terms of insulation, air sealing, window upgrades. There is different criteria and different values of rebates, but the premise is fairly similar. You're starting with a pre and post energy audit, you're making upgrades, and certain upgrades qualify for certain grants or rebates in this case. And Enbridge is also providing $600 back towards the cost of the audit, similar to Natural Resources Canada. Multi-unit residential buildings are also eligible. You don't need to live in that multi-unit building to qualify for Enbridge, so that's great for landlords, and it can easily accommodate secondary dwellings and nanny suites. It's not really designed for custom-built 8-plexes or 12-plexes or that type of thing that has many different heating systems. And also important to note that a fuel switch from gas to electric, so if you were in the Enbridge program, you need to decide to capitalize on an air source heat pump in the Greener Homes program at the same time, you will eventually be disqualified from the Enbridge program because you're no longer a gas customer, you're no longer a naturally gas heated home. Quickly, there's also an Enbridge home winterproofing program. So this is an energy conservation program for mid to low income homeowners or tenants. And there is an income qualification, so thresholds for maximum incomes to be qualifying for this program. But it is actually providing free energy audits, free insulation upgrades, and free air sealing and smart thermostats through this program. So depending on your situation, you may be eligible for some free upgrades. And these are not full Natural Resources Canada EnerGuide rating system audits that we'd have in the other programs, but they are as well energy assessments to assess the current conditions of the home. And then lastly, just quickly, and I think some of our folks from the city may touch on this a little bit as well, is the Better Homes Loan Program. Josh also mentioned this program, and this is a fantastic and new program through the city of Ottawa, and it's offering great 0% interest loans, up to 10% of the home value, which are tied to your property taxes. So the loans stick with the house versus yourself, rather than a personal loan. And the eligible upgrades in the Better Homes Loan Program are very similar to many of the upgrade measures we've seen in the grant programs and rebate programs. So insulation, windows and doors, but it also includes, expenses on window shading and films and weather stripping, green roofs, mechanical systems, thermostats and controllers, ventilation systems, which aren't covered in the grant and rebate programs, water efficiency, and also I should say it covers some of the work that might be required to complete some of these upgrades. So let's say you needed to remove existing vermiculite, potentially asbestos-laden insulation in the attic in order to increase the insulation up in the attic. Those loans could also help to cover the cost of that remediation as well. So things like that, or if you've had to repaint your house because you've just blown insulation into all the exterior walls and made Swiss cheese of them, then those are also upgrade measures that would qualify for the loan as well. But they do also leverage an initial energy assessment. So you're still going through that same process where you're establishing a baseline. And yeah, that's it for me. So again, I thank you very much for having me in to share a little bit of information. It was quite a bit and two very different but complementary topics. So hopefully it wasn't too much to absorb, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. There's a few questions into chat there. I don't think we'll have a chance to get to all of them since time is, we're running a little bit short on time, but so a few folks are wondering, can they double dip on the Enbridge and the Greener Homes grant? I think you touched on it a little bit, but are folks able to do both grants programs?
As long as it's not for the same measures. So technically speaking, Natural Resources Canada it doesn't matter whether you're double dipping on the same measures with a different program, but Enbridge doesn't allow double dipping for the same measures. So you can get windows from Enbridge and attic insulation from the Greener Homes program, but you wouldn't be able to get the same windows from both programs, incentivized.
And someone's wondering, geothermal, is that something that's covered under some of those grants?
Yeah, geothermal, any heat pump system, whether it's geothermal or air source, will qualify in the Greener Homes program.
Great. There's a few questions into chat there regarding the insulation, so maybe I'll let you sort of page back. I know we want to hear a little bit from Aaron from the city, so we'll sort of maybe let you jump into chat for some of those insulation questions and a little bit more specifics on the grant. But let's bring in the latest climate change staff there. Congratulate Aaron Thornhill for his position there, and he's going to give us a little bit of an update on the Better Home Loans program. Thanks for joining us, Aaron.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks everyone for sticking with us to make it to this stage of the evening. Great to see so many folks still in attendance, and thrilled to be able to share with you a little bit about the Better Homes Ottawa Loan Program, which Scott did allude to. So I won't spend too long here because Scott did a great job introducing it. But suffice to say, in sort of a high level picture, this loan program has really helped to design homeowners, landlords, property owners in general, as well as tenants in certain cases, be able to undertake deep energy retrofits within their home and do so with low cost, zero cost financing for the time being. So it is eligible to all small residential buildings, so Part 9 buildings, which is essentially 3 stories or less. So this does include multi-unit residential buildings up to a certain size. We do expect this program on current offer that will be described, I'll describe in a bit more detail in a moment, to last about 2 to 3 years. However, we are hoping, that this will be something, carried forward in perpetuity. For folks familiar with the city's energy evolution strategy and broader climate change master plan, there's some pretty high targets that we've set for ourselves in terms of home energy retrofits. It escalates to something on the order of 20,000 per year. So there's lots of work to be done and lots of homes to retrofit. So we definitely expect the loan program in some capacity to continue beyond this initial pilot stage. Beauty of the program, as Scott mentioned, 0% financing, but also no upfront cost to the homeowner. So there is an opportunity for folks to access a portion of their loan up front to help cover things like down payments and other costs of that nature. It is employing a local improvement charge mechanism. So for folks who aren't familiar with it, that's essentially akin to adding a charge to your property tax bill. So it adds to that, and in doing so, stays with the property. So if you move out of your home, you're not taking that loan with you. It stays with the property at the time of sale. As Scott alluded, there is a pre-retrofit audit required, and there's also a post-retrofit audit to finalize and complete the loan access. So both pre and post are required to be able to measure the impact of the retrofits. There is also, though, an energy coach available to support you along the way. So we are working with EnviroCenter at the City of Ottawa, but there's lots of other experienced energy coaches in the City of Ottawa as well. So just to reiterate, this is a slide that Scott showed as well, but the maximum financing amount, as you can see there, 10% of your property value, or $125,000. That property value is determined by the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, so your MPAC assessment, which is accessed directly by the city through your tax information. The minimum loan amount is $15,000 because we are hoping that folks will go sort of deep on these retrofits. As mentioned many times, the interest rate for now is 0%. Now, as the uptake has been fairly substantial in the first few months here, that may change, but we don't anticipate that to change for at least the calendar year of 2022, if not longer. But encouragement for all on the call to act sooner rather than later. The term of the loan is 20 years. There is the opportunity for full repayment prior to that 20-year term if folks are in a position to do so. But the longer term helps spread out that those loan repayment costs, helps the energy savings cover the cost of those of that capital repayment. There is a 4% administration fee associated. There's a low income offering stream we're working with Enviro Center on. There's a free retrofit manager there, and the administration fee is waived. I mentioned things about the lump sum payoff and the pre and post audits. In terms of qualification and credit rating, we don't require a credit rating. If you have 5 years of property tax and water billing information with the City of Ottawa, so it has to be with the state, within the City of Ottawa, we'll use that to sort of assess your eligibility. If you don't have that, then we may request a credit check at that time. There's no pre-qualification of contractors in Ottawa's program. However, we are working on some education and training workshops for contractors, which they can enroll in, which will get them the chance to be sort of featured on and profiled on the website, the Better Homes Ottawa website. And the financing sources for this from the city are coming from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Van City Credit Union. So just briefly to talk about the benefits to the applicants, you know, as I mentioned already, it's low cost, it's long-term financing. So, you know, this has really been shown to be necessary when it comes to getting folks to go deep on these energy efficiency retrofits. There's that expert advice, there's a quality control associated with the pre and post retrofit reports, you know, all going through the same kind of rigor as the NRCan sort of greener homes program. You know, we've seen things like increased property value, resale value associated with deep energy retrofits, and that's something we're trying to sort of quantify further here locally, and it's something we're going to be doing as this program rolls along. And of course, you know, probably familiar to most folks on this call, and it's been iterated by, I think, most of the speakers already, things like increased comfort, more resiliency to extreme weather events, and other things like that are all part and parcel of the benefits of a deep energy retrofit in your home. Sorry, it's been a long week. Just speaking quickly to the contractor certification programs that I alluded to. So we are working with the cities of Toronto and Durham to deliver some of these programs to contractors operating in those areas. The first of which is the working with Interquality to deliver some Canadian Home Builder Association certification workshops listed there. I'll drop a link in the chat when I finish up here to make sure folks who might be interested on the call can sign up for that or express interest in signing up for that. And so finally, just to wrap it up, the one-stop shop for all information about the loan program, as well as, you know, a myriad of other resources, is betterhomesottawa.ca. You can also sign up for newsletters, the climate change newsletter, and our recently launched Better Buildings Ottawa newsletter, which is really the first step in us taking this kind of a program and trying to port it over to the commercial building sector as well. So that's very early in its sort of operations, but feel free to sign up for more updates through the newsletter. And of course, as Nick's dropped it in a couple of times in the chat, take a moment to fill out the post-webinar survey. Really helps us at the city sort of figure out, you know, next steps, where the demand is within the city. And you can always contact us via the email on the screen. So I'll leave it there for now. But Nick, if there's questions in the chat, I see there's quite a few messages. Happy to answer.
Sure. Yeah. Some folks are just wondering about the 4% fee. Is that 4% of the amount of the loan, I assume?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then is that a one-time fee or annual, Daniel's wondering?
That's a one-time fee.
One-time fee. Okay. And then the energy coach, is that the same as the energy advisor, or though it'll be a slightly different role there, right? The energy coach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe it is similar, but maybe Scott, if he's still hanging around, can maybe jump in on that as well, just to get the terminology correct.
Yeah, so definitely is a little bit different if you're in the Ottawa Better Homes Ottawa website and you see references to the energy coach. It's usually more of a service that would take over where the energy advisor left off. Yeah. So once you have your reports in hand and you actually want to go through the motions of maybe selecting the right products or selecting the right contractor or their quotes or their plans. So someone who can kind of help take you almost like a little concierge service. It's going to help you kind of move through the process of your actual renovations or upgrades.
Yeah, thanks Scott for specifying there.
Great. Miguel's wondering, do you need a precise project plan before applying for the loan?
So you can do the initial application portion without any sort of precise plan. However, once we get to the sort of request for funding portion of the application process, you will need to outline, what measures you are applying for. What home energy efficiency measures that is.
Right. Heather's just wondering about any kind of extra charges for legal fees to discharge the lien on the property once the grant, once the loan's been paid back in full. Any other fees that you're looking at there?
No, the 4% administration charge is the only one, and that's simply added onto the total amount, and it's repaid over 20 years as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Apologies for folks if we didn't get your question in. I know there were quite a few. We'll try to save the chat and sort of see where we can fill in some of the gaps. I want to thank so much all of our speakers, Gary Sharp, who started us off, Steventhwaites, who sort of talked about windows, which was great. Thanks so much, Stephen and Gary. Thanks to Josh for talking panel upgrades. That was a really good, important piece that people have to consider. Big thanks to Scott for giving us all the building science perspective and the REA perspective, and talking a little bit more about some of those incentives and grants. I want to thank everybody over at the city as well, Aaron, Janice, and Emma, for all your support, getting the event out and populating it. Thanks to all of you. We've got nearly 100 people still on the call that are still eager to talk about retrofits, and hopefully everybody can fill out that survey, and hopefully everybody gets into the application of the Better Home Loan Program or the grant. And stay tuned for another episode. We'll be back in the spring. Make sure you do fill out that survey so we can figure out what topics we want to hit. I want to thank everybody so much. What a fantastic few hours there. Great to learn a little bit more about all these considerations. And we hope to just ramp up more and more of these energy efficient retrofits. So once again, this is Nick at SmartNet Alliance. I want to thank everybody again so much for joining us. Stay tuned for more content coming from us, and have yourselves a great evening. Enjoy all that snow that's coming down now if you're in the Ottawa area. Cheers, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.